This is an episode I've been thinking about for a very long time. I'm really excited about it. John, do you know what the month of June is dedicated to?
Men's mental health awareness?
Maybe, haven't confirmed. I might Google that later. But unless you said either the Sacred Heart or Pride Month, I am going to count you as wrong.
Okay, you know what? I am wrong.
So this is going to be a controversial issue. It's controversial in the church. It's controversial in society. We have a tendency to look at everything through the lens of a culture war. But the reality is a not insignificant number. In fact, millions of Catholics feel unwanted because they're gay or suffer what they might say same-sex attraction. That's what they're experiencing. So we want to look at that through a theological lens. We want to try and break down, how do the eyes of God see you? And how is it that we can help people come to understand exactly, precisely how God made them and how they are to live? In a lot of ways, the church has tried to make this a very, very simple issue. Understandings of what sexuality is certainly nothing like it was 500 years ago. And I don't think that means that we have to throw everything out. But if we are growing deeper in our relationship with God, we also have to grow deeper in our understanding of reality, because that's all that reality is. It's ultimately theology. So, John, I think you and I have talked about this offline before. This project got started several years ago when somebody that worked in the same building as me stopped me on the elevator and said, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Daniel?" And I said, "Yes." And I started to pull out a business card because I assumed that he wanted to talk about his career. And when we went to get lunch, I said, "Tell me about yourself." And he started telling me about his resume and what he studied in college. And he had been working in the same building for me probably about 5 or 6 months. But then he said, "I'm homeless." And then tried to move on very quickly to the next thing. I said, whoa, we cannot just gloss over that. Tell me why, like, what are you experiencing? And it turns out that despite all that he was doing, all the evidence of virtue in his life, the fact that he was going to the Latin Mass and he was really thriving in his parish, he was also experiencing same-sex attraction. He didn't use the word gay, and that's fine. But his parents kicked him out of the house. And so, that's why this isn't the theology for the marginalized. At no point did he ever describe himself as marginalized. At no point was he asking me to recognize political rights or make some sort of legal declaration. It was all about feeling unwanted, which is a deeply, deeply theological insight. So we're going to go into that today. John, I don't know, do you have any experience with Catholics saying that this is an issue that they've struggled with? Has anyone ever confided in you that sexuality is a tough issue for them personally as a Catholic?
I can easily point to you. Initially, when we had that conversation, I do know some other Catholics that do struggle with that as well, trying to remain faithful to the church while also struggling with being a part of the LGBTQ community or having same-sex attraction. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot more common than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, and the struggle is, how do we not take all of the politics that are going on around us and the debates in the church? How do we help people to understand exactly how it is that they were made? Obviously, you've probably noticed that bishops are taking different stances on this. Yeah?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like night and day with some of them.
Yeah, and particularly in the United States, we have a tradition of focusing on the structural elements of Catholicism, which is not a bad thing. I'm not making docking points from the Catholic Church in the United States for that. And believe it or not, in the upcoming book, Theology for the Unwanted, I go to great lengths to defend kind of that conservative traditional value that you really see thriving in parishes here in the United States, because I think it brings a lot of life to the church. But at the same time, there are some things that we kind of have to look at and go deeper. And by the way, if we're afraid of revisiting our understanding of things, It's probably because we're afraid that maybe it's not 100% true. What do you think?
I think that's spot on. I think a lot of people have a preset notion in their head, and when it's challenged, and it gets to the point where that challenge may be seeping into their brain a little bit, where they go, "Oh, well, wait a minute, maybe there is a point there." People tend to not do well with change or be challenged with their beliefs, so they tend to, I don't know, I'm not gonna say they act out, but they change behaviors. They change something to either protect what they think they understand versus what they're being challenged on, or they'll go the distance and research it more and then maybe change their mind on something. So it's a challenge of thought that will lead to a changing of mind, or they'll double down and kind of lock that idea out and go really hard on one topic.
That's so true. And it's not a kind of tension that we need to be afraid of. Whenever you start searching to go deeper in your relationship with Christ, there's going to be tension. And there's probably going to be truths that are eternally true everywhere and always, but they feel like they're opposites or they're polars. And you're going to have to hold on to both of those and really discern what is it that God is calling you to learn about a particular issue. So when folks come to me and they say like, "Hey, I'm struggling with sexuality," what is it that you think their minds are going to, or what do you think the church may have told them when they gave them advice?
Now, the church probably told them to keep quiet, but in all honesty, I mean, it all comes back to the overarching theme of sex, right? It all comes back to sex. It's where we live in a hypersexualized world, and the church is trying to combat, that moral relative. I believe it's moral relativity is the phrase, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah. So the church is trying to combat it. And in order to do that, they too focus on the idea of sex, and that becomes a hyper fixated point as well.
Dude, that hits so real for a couple of reasons for me. And in recent years, I've come to learn that there are actually many, many ways that the church addresses this pastorally. So if you've been told to be quiet, you are certainly not alone. I've learned that from so many of our listeners, but it's not like that everywhere. Thank goodness. We are starting to learn that truth, preaching truth, and also being radically honest, they're not opponents. And I think we've treated them as opponents for so long because we're afraid that if we allow folks who are different to start coming out and describing what it is that they're feeling, that that's going to lead to some sort of challenge, either of doctrine, which it has in many ways, but I think they're afraid of that unity that we have in the church. Unity is really our special gift that distinguishes us from many believers out there. Of course, when we have the sacraments and the Eucharist in particular, and that is part of the unity that we have. But we have often treated outsiders as threats. And so I guess thinking back to my story, you said they were probably told to keep quiet. Yeah, I was quite literally told in a confession setting, and this was not at my home parish. You can't even really guess where this was. But I was told, "Hey, if you don't talk about your sexuality, everything will be okay." And oh yeah, the look you're giving me right now.
Well, because it's funny because there's a double standard,
What is it?
right? So I clearly remember a confession I had where I believe I can say this because I'm not the priest, so I can confess my own sins here.
Okay.
I was confessing the sin of lust, right? I mean, that's something that a lot of male Catholics, especially back in college, definitely had an issue with. And I feel like the difference is from your stories, Dan, is like when you admit to having same-sex attraction, they tell you to be quiet. I quite literally told the priest that I saw a beautiful woman walking by and had impure thoughts, and he started asking me, what did she look like? And he was like, sometimes, when you see God's beautiful creation, and I'm just going like, that story you just said versus my story in regards to confessing lust to a priest is honestly, in my opinion, is a little weird because ultimately at the end of the day, it's still a sexual sin. right? There's no different variations of it. It all falls under sexual immorality in the sense of the church. So it's funny that they tell you just to be quiet about it, but then here I am in confession, and he's asking me to describe what God's creation looked like. I'm like, that's a little ridiculous.
It's funny. There's actually a phrase I heard for that once in Italian, prete detective, which is, priest detective.
Yes.
We have to inspect. But, that actually, I am of the opinion that is probably fairly rare. It does happen. I have heard from other folks that I've ministered to who thought that the questions went in an inappropriate route.
Yes.
And so we've talked about this in previous episodes, what to do if you think that you're in a confession setting where you just need clarity if your experience was normal. Always excuse yourself. Always let the priest know, like, hey, I'm not as ready to make my act of contrition as I thought I was. That way we're not casting suspicion or blame on the priest. And you excuse yourself and you find someone you trust to say, hey, this was the advice or these were the questions I was just asked. And that way we can kind of sort it out without causing too much alarm. But as we talked about in previous episode, like that's thankfully rare, and thankfully most confession experiences are good. However, back to the story of being told that everything will be okay if I just stay quiet. Do you know what my immediate reaction was internally, like what I felt deep down when I heard that?
It was probably shame or something. It was probably like you were upset with yourself.
It wasn't, dude.
It wasn't?
No, it was total and complete relief.
Oh.
You know why? Because for years I'd been thinking about, okay, I have to tell my family. I have to tell my closest friends. I hadn't told you. I hadn't told you for like 5 or 6 years after the experience I'm thinking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that there's something I'm experiencing about me which is abnormal and I don't have to tell anyone. Yeah, that was pretty good. It felt good. I mean, for a while. And I actually have been told this by a number of priests, and I go back and forth. I think the majority of them genuinely think that they are helping. The one experience I'm thinking of in my head here is we're talking about this probably wasn't totally above board. And so I did ask some others for advice years down the road. But I do genuinely believe that our priests are trying to help you avoid situations and scenarios which might cause you to run away from the church or cause people to kind of like poison the well so that you don't want the sacraments anymore. It's, I think, most of the time genuine. But if we are preaching truth, should we be honest?
I mean, truth and honesty, I feel like go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah. We at least should not, at the minimum, we should not discourage people from speaking their experiences. I don't know if it's actually Men's Mental Health Month. You may have just been making that up. Or maybe it's every month of the year, but as he Googles this. But, if we're really trying to be there for our parishioners, mind, body, spirit, we cannot lead them to hide any experience about themselves. We have to instead try and empower them. Okay, you have a smirk on your face.
I do, because you questioned me about something I'm very passionate about, which is mental health. Yes, June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month.
Oh, look at that.
Along with Pride, which, in all honesty, go hand in hand because, we'll dive into that a little bit later, but I feel like those two go hand in hand and complement each other.
They do. Not the perfect segue, but let's talk about how the church has been changing its framework. Oh, I promise you would always find a way to bring up the Franciscans. So here we go. For so many centuries in the church, there was this idea that if you wanted to be that perfect Catholic, that you would what? What would happen in your life? Like if you wanted to be a guaranteed saint, the first 3-4 centuries of the church, what do you think it was?
Go to church?
No. Martyrdom.
I mean, that, that works too. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know many people that'd be like, you know what? That's my first choice.
But it got to a point where you have all of these Catholics who, for centuries, have been hearing the stories of the saints, specifically the martyrs. But what's the problem now is everyone's Catholic. And so it's really hard to find someone who's willing to martyr you when everybody is in your club. And St. Francis himself was actually the one that kind of proposed the new model for being Christian, which is, how would you describe St. Francis's ministry?
I mean, it was counter logic to his day, right? He came from a wealthy family, and the first thing he did in his act of defiance was to strip himself of his father's rich clothing that he was wearing in a very public setting and renounce the material world and live in a raggedy old habit out in the hills of Assisi and minister to the poor, minister to the rejected, the leper colonies, those who have been rejected from that era's society. He was the one that was trying to redirect the church to say, hey, look, the rejects, the outcasts, that's what Jesus reached out to. That's what we need to do.
I'm going to find the source and post it, I guess, on our website and also for the show notes for this podcast. But there was a really great lecture about St. Francis of Assisi, probably took place about a decade ago. And they talk about how at first he tried being this good Christian by giving money.
Yes.
And it just...
His dad was not happy about that, by the way.
Well, it felt lackluster. And I think there was a story about coins. And he's like, well, why are we doing this? And that he learned upon further reflection that calling wasn't just to be a martyr. That's how the past age experienced Christianity. Now it's to be with the poor. Now that we're all in the club and we're all Catholic, it's to be with the poor and the marginalized. And very much in this case, I would say the unwanted. Right? We make that distinction in this podcast because not everyone who feels unwanted is marginalized or feels marginalized. It's a deeply theological insight where you have this gap between how the eyes of God see you and how you experience your own dignity or how other people see you. It's kind of like a sense of judgment. And you're like, I'm not sure if it's merited because I know that I am wonderfully made in the eyes of God. Well, come to the modern age and you'll see that this is all playing out again. We are, as we're probably going to mention on every episode, we are retreating into our online bubbles. We are staying home more. We're not going out. We're meeting people on Hinge and not at the traditional Catholic place, the bar. But the point is that developing those interpersonal relationships are becoming harder and harder. And so that's why the church is really becoming so introspective in what does it mean to be a human person? What does it mean to be man as created by God? So let's think about this. We talked about how the Catholic Church in the United States has this tendency to hyper-legalize everything. Well, if we are reading in the book of Genesis, imagine you're like a lawyer and you're talking to the judge and you're trying to tell the judge like what just happened in Genesis. What did God create?
In which one? Are we talking Genesis 1 or Genesis 2?
No, just talk to me about God's creation.
Oh, you created the heavens and the earths. You created the birds and the bees.
Birds and the bees, okay. Yeah. What else?
Man,
yeah.
And then he decided to break himself off a piece of that Kit Kat bar rib and make a woman out of it, right?
No disrespect intended.
No. That's just, that's the story. He took the rib of Adam and thus created woman.
Yes, exactly. So if I were a lawyer in a courtroom, I might say like, hey, Your Honor, God clearly created man and woman, or male LLC and female LLC. We'll try not to get canceled before the next episode, I promise. But, the legalism that we kind of allow to slip into our culture, it can prevent us in some ways. It keeps us unified, but it prevents us from going deeper. And so my question is, why? Right? Like, why does the supreme God have to create two separate prototypes? I mean, surely the suggestion is not that our God is just like really inefficient and model 1 was not good. So here's model 2. You ever thought about why God might have created us differently?
One thing that pops into mind is possibly procreation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Genesis 1 definitely says that.
Yes.
Genesis 1 talks a lot about making babies. Genesis 2, however, focuses on unity,
Yes.
companionship.
Mhm.
And those are really the issues that are plaguing the church right now. Maybe we need more babies too, but we're really forgetting how to reflect on God's creation for us to experience the world differently. Father Daniel Horan, also a Franciscan,
Mhm.
he's a moral theologian. He has a book on it's anthropology, but I believe he calls it Catholicity and Emerging Personhood. Again, we'll put the source and link out to the book in the show notes here. But he says God didn't create two entities because he had to create two entities. It's because we experience the world different, and through our differences, we come to understand something new about God. And it's not necessarily that he's trying to make a point that there's two, that it's binary. I mean, you look at the Trinity. Trinity is three,
Mhm.
right? I'm not making a suggestion here about a number of genders. That's not a topic we're going to here. But in the eyes of God, he created differences in us, and we are to experience those differences as a reflection of our creation in the image and likeness of God. And so whenever somebody tells me that they're struggling with same-sex attraction or that they're gay, and quite frankly, I don't care what it is that you choose to say, they are both of those are modern terms. Same-sex attraction, for the record, is like, I'm older than that term and I'm in my 30s. True story.
It's a valid point.
But the point is that we want to make sure everyone has the theological tools to understand and discover how it is that God made you, and how do you discover that God made you wonderfully? Because we bias ourselves all the time in our reflections when when you go to confession, you're telling your sins and the priest is saying, don't do that again, or, submit yourself to the justice of God. We don't always have the tools in confession to really help people go out and understand, how do I discover how it is that God made me? So let's talk about the solution. Pope Francis focused a lot on what we call the Dignity Society. Now, Dignity Society is something that the Catholic Church in the United States actually has a jumpstart on because of one particular political issue that we are very, very good at being involved in. You want to take a guess at what that is?
I'm going to say pro-life.
For sure.
Okay.
100%. And by the way, did you ever go to a March for Life?
Yeah, I went to several of them. It's a very large crowd that
Yeah.
shows up. I would say it's like 97% Catholic.
This is so true.
And yeah, I mean, it was an experience.
I've been going since 1991.
Oh my goodness.
1990 if you count me in the womb, because I was there. But I didn't get my LLC yet because I didn't have a birth certificate, but I was there, and I've really enjoyed going to the March for Life, and I really do enjoy seeing all the different flavors of Catholicism that show up. I mean, you have everyone from the protesters to you've got the friars, the Dominicans, the nuns. You have an abundance of Catholic schools that are there. But it's fun to see the different flavors of Catholicism that all show up and that we experience that unity together. So Pope Francis reflected quite a bit on the need to move from what's called the Honor Society, according to a Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor, over to the Dignity Society. So, over the past many centuries in the Catholic Church, we have focused too much on honor, meaning, are you compliant? Are you following the rules? Are you sitting at the front pew or the back pew, right? No, come on, we all secretly judge.
Oh, we do. And as someone who sits at both, just to kind of throw people off when I go to mass, like one weekend I'll be in the back, and the next weekend I'll be in the front, and it's like, wait, wasn't he in the back next week? Like you can hear the mumbling,
the mumbling,
the mumbling,
sir,
the side eye.
What's going on at your parish?
You know what? You don't want to know.
So, yeah, we're moving from the Honor Society to the Dignity Society. The Dignity Society is very much rooted in the idea that in the modern world, where people have alternatives to faith. I mean, if you think about During the time of St. Francis, if there were a lightning strike, people would be like, oh, somebody in our town made God really angry. Or if somebody fell ill, it was because you had sinned, right? The reality is that we have alternate explanations now. We have science. And the Catholic Church does not look at science as the enemy of religion. Faith and reason are like the two sides that make up this coin called reality. And I'm going to have to trademark this. Theology is reality.
Yeah. I mean, when you really think about it too, the Catholic Church really led the way in some groundbreaking scientific research and discoveries. So you're spot on. Like they go hand in hand. The idea that faith and science can't mesh, like they can't be together, like they're oil and water. That's, to me, I don't necessarily believe that. I feel like they complement each other.
Yeah, and we have to find a framework to understand in accordance with science, but also in accordance with sacred scripture and sacred tradition. How is it that each of us are called to live? So on the issue of sexuality, somebody says, oh my gosh, being gay is a sin. By the way, the upcoming book, Theology for the Unwanted, is going to dive deep, deep, deep into the theology of this and also make some predictions for where the church is going based off of its history. Obviously, we've gone through many, many periods of change. I like to point out that the rules for receiving communion seem to change every 150 years in a major way.
I was going to say it feels like it changes every 2 months, but yeah, I mean, we'll go with 150 years.
But the reality is that the Catholic Church has always gone deeper in its relationship with God, partially based off of expectations and norms, partially based off of science and our understanding of ourselves. But we have to take all of the traits that God has created about ourselves and understand, how do we point that not towards our own desires and indulge, but how do we point that back towards God? And more importantly, in the ways of creating virtue in a world where we are lacking authentic Christian relationships. Virtue is about creating harmony, and vice is about the self. I mean, even this, you said that we tend to hypersexualize whenever we're scolding people. We really focus on sex.
I mean, it's a part of society. Society's hypersexualized, so that tends to come out a little bit.
It does. The ironic thing to me is that even when we are trying to help someone avoid sin, we somehow make it about ourselves.
Yes.
Right? When you're saying, don't do that, or that's naughty, that has nothing to do with pointing our lives toward God. It is simply about avoiding pointing at the self. And if we are still talking about the self in that moment, we need to balance it out. I'm not saying that the priest should be like, don't do that. I'm saying that we need to try and understand from theology, how is it that we orient our lives toward God? So you want to take a stab at some of the reasons why historically the Catholic Church has said that being gay is wrong.
I mean, obviously the big one is going to be the lack of procreation. That is one of the ones that they tend to point out first and foremost. 2, there's the stereotype that it's a form of like being selfish, right? It's you're
hedonistic, I think is the word, right?
Yeah, like you're looking inwards, right? You're looking into your own desires versus putting God first, kind of thing.
Okay, that's fair, and we're not going into it today on the procreation issue. However, I will point on the reflections page on theologyfortheunwanted.com. If you click on, there's a link for couples who are having a difficult time conceiving. And that is really, I mean, it's written for a straight couple, because the idea was that I was writing this for couples that are sacramentally married but are feeling some sort of shame or embarrassment or wondering if others around them are judging them for not having a child. It's a deep theological reflection there. So take a look at that, because in some ways, it also applies to folks who are gay and wondering about the issue of parenthood for themselves. So take a look at that. But historically, we have to acknowledge one, the Bible does 6 times, I believe, mention same-sex acts. We know for sure that there's no concept of sexual orientation in the Bible. And so I'm not going to do that, but it is important to look at what the church historians, the theologians, the Pontifical Biblical Commission, all of these have taken a look at this very difficult issue to try and say, okay, clearly it's not about being gay, but it's also not a green light either, right? So, you can look into those, but historically, the Catholic Church has been against homosexuality or same-sex relations because there's been a fundamental assumption that they are rebelling against their nature. Looking inward, you mentioned that one, that's a true point. There there were there was a short period in Catholic history where they also believed that it was like a preferred type of crime. Like some people like to steal from the marketplace and other people like to be homosexual. That didn't last too long. People moved on from that argument, but nice try. So the question is someone who is gay rebelling against their nature? Are you choosing it? Are you choosing it over how it is that God made you? If so, would you say it's wrong?
I mean, I think from a theological standpoint, if you do believe it's against nature and what God intended, then yes.
100%. So that is one element of the theology of it, is that if you are rebelling against your nature, you are sinning. This is not just about sexuality. This is really about anything. But that is the understanding that the church has had. But I don't know, look at the expectations of relationships in church history, and you'll see that things have changed wildly. We have to be really, really careful not to judge historic figures in the church with the lens of a 21st century eye. JP2 was really fantastic about moving the church on the human dignity issue. Pope Francis even further when he applied it to the death penalty, saying that it's inadmissible, right? We didn't really prioritize human dignity for a very long time in the Catholic Church. Part of that is because the stories of people who were suffering some sort of marginalization or oppression weren't able to speak until really democracies and modern life came about. But we are not talking here about marginalization. We're talking about people who feel unwanted. And I think, first and foremost, if you are suffering, if you're embarrassed, if you're like me, if you were told to keep quiet and keep secrets and that things would be okay, first and foremost, you have to be honest with yourself and ask, do I believe that I was made in the image and likeness of God? Or do I believe that God made a mistake?
I mean, I don't think we can sit here and say God has made a mistake. I think that would be going against what we believe God is and him being all powerful. And, I don't think that's a realistic option in this case.
No, it's not, because as Catholics, we definitely don't believe that God makes mistakes. But we do have to warm up to the idea and give ourselves permission. We are all biased by the people around us. There are many things that maybe you don't like about yourself. Could be your hair, could be your accents, could be your sexuality. There's really a limitless number of things that you could be embarrassed about. But again, the feeling of being unwanted is a recognition that God created you in a particular way, and either you are struggling to meet the same realization or people around you are. And so, first and foremost, I don't know. Do you have advice for anyone that's struggling with that?
I mean, you just have to be able to, I'm not going to say just like live your life, but like you have to do it in a way where you're comfortable with where you're at with your faith, right? You can't, I feel like from like a mental health standpoint, like you have to be able to take care of yourself, but obviously religion is going to be important to you. So you need to do it within the sense of where your theology stands. So, at the end of the day, you have to realize God created you. And if God doesn't make mistakes, you're not a mistake either.
That's exactly right. And of course, it's Pride Month. And so really depending on where you are, if you're in a major metropolitan area anywhere in the world, there's probably a Pride parade, probably a Pride festival. there's a lot of competing ideas about what pride is. And, John, I was telling you that recently I pulled up photos of the local pride parade here and I showed it to my mom. She wasn't particularly interested, didn't seem like she was interested in seeing them. Probably because she had the idea in the back of her head that maybe there's like a lot of nudity or inappropriate stuff here. Certainly possible that some cities are like that. I have heard, for example, that New Orleans is like that. Don't know for sure. So now again, I'm biased against New Orleans.
I mean, Mardi Gras also.
No,
and that's not a pride parade.
No, the funny thing is, Mardi Gras is the most queer thing I've ever heard of. But somehow we make it a festival for everyone right before Lent.
Right before Lent.
Right before Lent. No, I showed photos that I found of the local pride parade, and it was actually very striking because it was more than 1,000 couples that had adopted a child and were walking along in the parade with them. There wasn't nudity. There wasn't anything that was particularly hypersexualized. It was quite honestly a protest. I mean, not a huge difference between what I saw at that particular pride parade and the March for Life. I don't know if that shocks you.
I mean, I think that's going to shock a lot of people to try to comprehend that, because obviously, well, one, the idea that a pride parade will have like nudity or less clothing, then like you're okay. Well, if that's a preconceived notion I have, and then you're going to tell me it's like the March for Life that takes place in January, like. Of course, like I mean, that alone is like as apples to oranges.
Okay,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it is going to be shocking to come to that realization that like you said, there may be some cities where you do have that, but in most cases, as you said, it's not really hypersexualized. It's not really any nudity. It's just like you said, it's a protest, right? It's being vocal about, this community is here. This community is a part of our overall community. And, that community wants the same rights and the same privileges that every other community, at least here in this country, has. And, I can't think of a better way of doing it than with music and dancing and just everyone having a good old time.
It's so funny you say that, because at the office last week, somebody heard that Shakira was going to be in town along with J-Lo.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Wow, I can't believe that they would come to Washington, D.C. That's fantastic." And I said, "Did you really think that Pride was going to have boring artists?"
Yeah, like Nelly was going to show up or something. No. Nelly hasn't been relevant in 20 years.
I went to a T-Pain concert in Mississippi one time, and I thought that was the best concert I'd ever been to, and I just realized that I was totally out of my element. But
side note, though, T-Pain live is actually pretty good when he's not using auto-tune. That's
so fair.
That might be news breaking to some people, but it's not a music podcast. That'll be coming later, maybe. But yes, your example, though.
So I was talking with somebody about my observation, somebody that had left Christianity because they felt unwanted, not marginalized. It wasn't a political statement, a legal statement. It was just, Christians don't want me because I'm gay. So I brought up my observations that like, hey, it seems like everyone here, or most of the people here, are really excited about showing off their family. And this very much has a protest vibe, a peaceful protest vibe with a lot of music. And the person I was talking to actually didn't like the idea that I was trying to make this sound like such a family event. And I was reflecting on it, and it was almost because they had felt so unwanted by Christians who, we hold ourselves up as these family people. Because I felt so unwanted by us, they did not want me to impose those Christian family ideals onto this protest, which for many people, no shortage of people at the Pride Parade broke free from Christianity and now have dramatically improved their lives. That's a reality. And I think we have to take a moment to acknowledge, like, when we allow such a massive group of people, and there were over 300,000 people at the Pride Festival this weekend, When we allow such a massive group of people to not understand how to Christianize their concrete life experiences beyond just saying, no, don't do this, but not even give them the tools to understand or discover for themselves how it is that they were made by God, well, there's going to be consequences there. And I think one of the ways that we can try and create a pastoral path forward to help people discover how it is that God created them is recognize that there have been so many changes in the expectations of a relationship since the beginning of Christian times. I start with thinking about St. Augustine. That was a weird case. Now, I don't know if you've ever read the Confessions, and I found it so fruitful spiritually, but also had to acknowledge that there were some things in there that in the 21st century would be really, really strange. For example, he was 31 years old, engaged to a 10-year-old. Now, to his credit, on a human level, despite what culture was telling him, he was not attracted to this 10-year-old girl. Thank God. And he ran off with another woman, someone who was actually closer to his age, someone whom he was attracted to. And they ended up having a son. And I may be getting the timeline wrong, but I believe he was with her for a full decade. Now, under the Christian expectations of his time, because marriage came with the obligation, came with money, came with land, titles, there was something very legal that was attached to it. The problem is that even all the way back then, the law has never been able to fully recognize your human dignity. And you can start peeling back the onion as we move forward through history, because you can see how we start to develop this idea that, maybe love isn't just a contract. When you read the biography of St. Thomas More, another saint that I find deeply inspirational for many reasons, in the biography, I want to say it's by William Roper, another source I'm going to put in the show notes. He makes the point over and over and over again that he likes his wife. Strange, right? Like if you're writing a biography about you, would you have to say over and over again, like, Dan is my friend because I enjoy hanging out with him?
No, because if I say it too many times, people are going to be like, okay, maybe he really doesn't enjoy hanging out.
You're right. It's a classic, like, are we saying this because we're trying to convince people because it's not true?
Or are you trying to convince yourself?
Exactly. Well, I think the reality was that in Thomas More's time, it was unusual to marry someone for love. And of course, motivations are always complicated, but St. Thomas More genuinely seemed to love and enjoy being around his wife. And people around him thought that was amazing. That's incredible. I can't believe that you would want to be with your wife beyond the obligatory procreation hour. So it was unusual for his time. And I can't suggest that St. Thomas More had a proto-human dignity understanding of Christian philosophy. He was very much a man for his time. He was an excellent, excellent saint who really helped us advance understanding of many Christian principles. But if you read his biography, he kind of had this sense that there's something about being me, something about just being by myself that isn't enough. And it kind of goes back to that point that we were created for relationship with others. John, when you had first converted, were you interested in all but anything that St. John Paul II wrote? Or at that point, because Benedict was Pope, I think you were like, what was it that you all were talking about in RCIA?
So the year before, was it the year before leading up to it? Yeah, leading up to my Easter vigil of being brought to the church was when Pope Francis was elected Pope.
Oh.
So I had a very, very short stint with Benedict XVI. But in terms of JP2, yeah, I mean, you, even as a Protestant, you couldn't get away from him. He was everywhere. And you actually ask a lot of Protestants, they will admit that they liked JP2 because of how he was able to reach out to them.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
In what sense?
Just theologically, not having kind of like that sharp tongue towards Protestants. I feel like there's a lot of I don't want to say hatred because I feel like that's too strong of a word. I would say strong misunderstandings between both parties in alignment with what's actually going on in the Catholic Church and on the Protestant side of Christianity. So JP2 was able to kind of speak in a way that was fruitful for both Catholics and Protestants alike. And he just was able to bridge that gap, that barrier, if you will, to really kind of hit home. And I honestly think Pope Francis was able to do that too. In fact, I talked to my parents as well, who are not Catholic. Both my sister and I converted. They have not. They are still Methodist, but they both really enjoyed the papacy of Pope Francis and what he had to say, because he too had a welcoming message for all Christians, not just Catholics. So converting, definitely knew about JP2. Everyone still talked about JP2. So yeah, it wasn't anything shocking. I mean, I think even to this day, JP2 still has a major influence on a lot of Catholics around the world.
Oh, 100%. And I think when we're looking at this shifting timeline, expectation and understanding of relationships and what love and marriage is and understanding the self, Augustine was certainly one of the first and earliest markers. And I think he was quite advanced for his time. And St. Thomas More, in another way, extremely advanced. JP2, Pope Benedict, they both had this theology of nuptials. They understood things. Even the relationship between Jesus and the church, it was a sort of marriage. They described a lot of their understanding of Christ through the language of marriage, and there's no doubt that both of them were deeply impacted by St. Thomas More. But I think that even as much as John Paul II advanced us on human dignity, there's still a temptation to read him in a strictly legal way. And for the record, if John Paul II were alive today, if he were alive today, I'd be really fascinated to see what he would have to say about the issue of sexuality. But when he was writing on this decades ago, there was not that understanding that somebody potentially could be created with more than just one sexual orientation. That is something that the church is grappling with right now. Most of Europe and Latin America have, at this point, culturally accepted that people can be created to love somebody of the same gender, and that at the minimum, we should not bully them or make them feel unwanted because of it. But in the United States, in certain parts of the United States, and then in most, not all, but most of sub-Saharan Africa, there's still this idea that there's only one type of sexuality in all of the diverse creation that God has. Even going back to Genesis, where one type of human, meaning male, was not enough, that God created a different type of human so that we could go deeper in our relationship with Christ. In some parts of the world, we're still grappling with that because that is a really big thing to let go of. Like it's kind of a shocking development when you think about it. And Father James Allison, who himself has experienced a very difficult time in the church because he stuck his neck out on the issue of sexuality decades ago. He's given many talks where, when my dad was in high school, it was boys and girls were separated. All the girls were on one wing and boys were in the other wing. And Father James Allison has talked about how for most of human history, there was this understanding that if somebody was acting out with same-sex attraction, it's because there weren't girls around, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. But now that we're all together, scientists are saying, oh my gosh, wait, some people actually like that? And it's a shocking change. I mean, I don't know. Have you noticed with different generations, have you noticed that people who are significantly older than us might be less likely to adopt this understanding of the world that people are created in different ways.
I feel like that's true in multiple facets, right? When you take a look at any major social issue, if you will, in society, there's that you hear older generations say, "Oh, that's just the way I was raised. I'm stuck in my ways. I don't want to change because this is what I know." And I get it. Change can be scary, but as younger generations come and they grow into a position where they have more say and more leadership, that's when things do tends to change, and the older generations don't like it as much anymore because, the older generation's like, "Oh, well, when I was in charge, we did X, Y, and Z," but they're not in charge anymore, kind of thing, right? So,
Right.
so yeah, and I feel
Oh,
like
wait, that's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point to say that like we're retired and we're not in charge anymore. And
Mhm.
if only we were still in charge. Imagine if you applied that to faith,
yeah,
right? The idea that something that you relied on as so perfect, it's in a neat box and nothing was able to get in or out of the box because we described things so perfectly. And now science and culture are challenging us. In many ways, there is a lot of science out there and a lot of issues in culture that are challenging the church. And I would not say like, oh, all these developments are fantastic. There's no doubt a lot of things that are changing in the world that are just very scary. And so I understand that where it is difficult to let go of something that you have held on to for so long. Unfortunately, being willing to do that is part of growing deeper in your relationship and understanding of God.
absolutely.
So, theologian James Allison has given these talks, and of course, social scientists found it very, very curious. But then I believe it was in the end of the 19th century, so more or less around the same time that we were having our Civil War here, Europeans were out there thinking, wow, maybe there's more than just one specific prototype of sexuality in nature. And that was extremely controversial and ultimately developed into the idea that it might be an identity. The identity issue is where I think we start to get into these culture war debates of whether or not you should go to Pride Month or whether or not you should be at church celebrating just Sacred Heart Month. You know, what are people saying about it on your TikTok feed?
My TikTok feed's not actually talking about any of that. No, my TikTok feed is overly positive, right?
Okay. The algorithm.
The algorithm, has pretty much figured me out. Obviously, like I don't have an issue with the LGBTQ community. I am a firm believer in everyone being able to live their life. So, I'm watching videos of people having fun, people being able to celebrate who they are, their identity, with their friends, and have amazing musical acts to be there to help the celebration as
You
well.
mean Shakira and J-Lo?
Shakira canceled in Washington, D.C., by the way. So a lot of people were upset about that. But no, I think at the end of the day, obviously we're both millennials, right? So, and in the millennial generation, it's not a taboo topic to us, right? The idea of having friends that are gay is not a taboo. It's something that we kind of just grew up with, and it was something that we never really thought twice about. And younger generations also continue that same trend. So yeah, I think overall it's been at least on social media on my end, it's been overly positive.
Sure. And the problem, unfortunately, is that it's not like with the algorithm on Facebook where it's just you're friends with Aunt Betty, and so therefore you see all of Aunt Betty's political posts.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
We have to mute Aunt Betty sometimes.
We do. And for the record, for any of the listeners, if you ever have to mute somebody, including us, please feel free to do that. Your mental health is extremely important. What I do want to say is I don't want us to get to a point where we are throwing out the older generation or throwing out people from certain continents because they do not see things the way that we do. The idea, if theology really is reality, is that we all have to discern together. The gift of the Catholic Church is that we have unity, and that unity has never been entirely perfect. Mm-hmm. It's a very messy unity where we all Some countries want to walk very quick, other countries want to walk very slow. Some countries, I'm thinking Germany, for example, wants to walk loudly. Japan is a church that it's not quite the same as when I said I was told to be quiet about my experiences, but in Japan, the church would not look favorably on the German method where, they take a sledgehammer to anything that is remotely unjust. So God is capable of speaking to all of the world all at once. And so what we want to do is we want to encounter one another so that they can understand. At the same time that JP2 was talking more and more about human dignity, I think people started to become aware of the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
This has been truly devastating. I also find it very fascinating when somebody, well, I guess converts amidst such a huge crisis,
Mhm.
but also when somebody says that I am not leaving the church. Of course, I haven't left the Catholic Church over this, but when somebody has really grappled with how sad they are over what we have done as a Catholic community and how in many ways we have not really done a fantastic job at trying to prevent future generations from becoming vulnerable, this is something that really causes us to reevaluate. And so that's something that was going on over the past 20 years and probably is the main reason why you have such widespread acceptance of LGBT within Catholic communities and Catholic parishes in many countries across the world. This is not just a European phenomenon. And likewise, it is not only an American phenomenon where many parts of our country we are not welcoming. But I don't know, have you thought about what would you say to someone who said, well, the Catholic Church clearly doesn't understand everything because look at what they did with sex abuse.
I mean, it's easy to do that with any organized religious body, if you will.
Exactly. I agree.
And it's not a Catholic Church issue in itself, right? Unfortunately, it is an issue that even takes place in the Protestant churches as well. The difference being that the Catholic Church has 1.3 billion Catholics
Mm-hmm.
and is a major player in the world, right? You have the Vatican. The Vatican is its own country. It has its own diplomats. It has far-reaching power to other countries. In fact, you can pinpoint times where popes have jumped in to help get a ceasefire in a war or help with any kind of international crisis that's going on. So that's just the power of the Catholic Church. So when something like that happens, it tends to gain more attention than, some Protestant denomination that has maybe 75,000 followers or a couple million followers, right? It's not going to make as big of news just because it doesn't have as far-reaching consequences, right? So I think even as a convert, knowing that I'd be coming into a church that has that history, right? It's something you have to be willing to, I'm not going to say take the burden, because at the end of the day, you can't defend it, right? You have to call it out. You have to call out the church for its inappropriate handling of the sex abuse scandal, just the same way that we call out the church for other controversial issues that they did in the past. Like, I think of medieval times is the first thing that comes to my mind, right? Obviously, it's not going to be on the same level here, but indulgences, the idea of paying to get your loved one's time off in purgatory, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that was just a money grab that the church did, and we understand that nowadays, right? That's another dark thing of the past of the Catholic Church. Again, it's not on the same level, but that's just something that comes with being a part of an organized religion. I think something that converts can do, because we are willing to ask questions, we also are probably a little bit more open to the idea of calling out our own institute when things aren't going well or things are being done incorrectly. And I know myself and other converts have been very open about the church's mishandling of that situation. And I think that's really the only way to kind of heal as a church is to acknowledge those issues and start making those changes, right? You don't want to sweep it under the rug. That's what the church did for years, and all it did was cause more pain and suffering. So yeah, I mean, you just have to be willing to admit that the church is run by humans at the end of the day, and humans make some pretty bad decisions.
Each of the crises that the Catholic Church has gone to has in some way led us to a deeper, better framework for understanding Christ. And of course, as we have JP2 doing such a great job on human dignity, and in many ways his record on appointing bishops, I think, quite frankly, giving him the benefit of the doubt, he would hear somebody attack so-and-so saying like, hey, this person, watch out for them. And he would assume that, okay, maybe you hate the church because you're speaking out. And unfortunately, many of these folks ended up getting appointed to higher positions. It seems, from all the evidence we have, it seems like that's what happened. He was so willing and enthusiastic about defending the church that there was a blind spot here. So he promoted human dignity. He really elevated it as a teaching in the church. He was a crusader and an important theologian on many issues, from the theology of nuptials to, of course, theology of the body is something that people talk about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an issue of sexuality, but that's about helping people orient themselves towards God using their bodies. When we take that and we have this growing understanding of sexuality, as in maybe, just possibly, people are created to experience love in different ways, then now is the time to understand Charles Taylor and moving from the honor society where we focus on compliance and whether or not you're sitting in the front pew or the back pew and giving you, like, I don't know, United Airlines bonus mileage points because of your participation in things. No, we need to understand truth in light of John chapter 8, when Jesus is writing in the sand and he tells the woman to sin no more. But as we have discussed already, that in the Greek, sin no more means take better aim. And so if you want to be a better Christian, as I hope we all do, we have to allow room for the messiness. And we have to try and give people the tools, even those that we have to admit, maybe we don't want them in the pews. Maybe we really don't want Shakira and J-Lo at our next parish picnic. As we know, Shakira will cancel anyway.
She will cancel. Her stage crew will get stuck in Boston.
But Khalid will be available.
Khalid will be there.
Yeah. We have to be willing to have a little bit of a messy church if we want to follow the methods of Jesus in John chapter 8, because sin no more means take better aim. We're helping people practice. We're trying to take the concrete realities that, to be honest, none of us fully understand the origins of sexuality at this moment. There's always that perennial debate. It's like, is it environmental? Is it chosen? Is it something you're born with? And then the scientist is like, it's a mixture of all of those, but can't pinpoint why. We have to be honest that this is something the church is still trying to understand. We need to give the different generations of people that have dedicated their lives to the church the patience and grace to understanding to work this out together in unity. But the only way to do that is if we are all willing to encounter one another, if we are no longer willing to stay silent about the things that we have experienced, and if we're willing to kind of put down all of our defenses and just say, dear God, I think this is how you made me. My desire is to live life exactly precisely as you made me. And to be honest, John, if we can agree on just that one statement, I don't care if it takes 10, 20 years for all of us to figure out exactly precisely what that means. The church has had many messy transition periods before. I really do believe that the Holy Spirit, through the unity as well of our Holy Father, helps us understand these issues and to find the continuity of doctrine. Sometimes continuity, meaning like we're not breaking from previous rules. It comes in surprising ways. And it always ends up being deeper. And people didn't think that we were going to have a better explanation for the Eucharist being the real flesh and presence of Jesus Christ until Thomas Aquinas came along, and suddenly he's like transubstantiation, and now we're like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. It comes in surprising ways, and we have to allow ourselves to be surprised. The theology of this, you can find some more of this on the reflections page of theologyfortheunwanted.com. Stay tuned, because there's a book announcement coming soon. This is something I've worked on for many years now. It will, no surprise, be called Theology for the Unwanted, Reclaiming Your Place in God's Church. And I'm very grateful to Paulus Press for being willing to take on this project with me. But I promise you that all the readers, when you get it, it will give you tools, many, many reflections that you can take to slowly work through in your own life. How is it that God created you? And how do I, while staying totally unified with Rome and the Catholic Church, how do I live my life as God created me? And what are the question marks that I should still have, so I have the humility to say, I want the church to help me work this out? It's a two-way street. I want to thank everyone for listening. It's so meaningful when somebody reaches out to say that they've had an unwanted experience in the church, meaning that they don't feel like they can sit in the pews and be totally honest about what they're experiencing. Or maybe it's that you have tried to get extra credit by doing extra masses or volunteering at 25 things a week to make up for either sins or other things you're judging yourself about harshly. Your experiences matter. That is the type of relational encounter that we are lacking in the church right now. And so I'm not saying you have to go out there and broadcast your feelings to the world, but I encourage every listener to find somebody that you can talk to and say, hey, walk with me. Just like John chapter 8, I want to take better aim. So thank you again for listening, and thank you to everyone that has shared their stories. Talk to you soon.